Hello, everybody. This is Jacob Sapochnik with the Enchanting Lawyer Podcast. This is a show where we interview the most inspiring entrepreneurs from all over the world who share with us their expertise and inspire us to do better at what we do. Today we have a very special guest, Howard Lim, and I wanted to bring Howard to discuss something that I get a lot of questions about. Social proof branding. Why would service businesses consider themselves as a brand? And Howard is one of the top experts in the field. Howard is the founder of one of the most successful branding firms in Los Angeles. It's called the How Creative. He's been building authentic brands for more than 2 decades. He supports and empowers businesses to create products and services into fully developed brand identities that inspire companies to reach their ultimate success. He has actually transformed the brands of emerging and leading Fortune 100 companies such as Disney, Matel, Xerox, ABC Network, and Honda, influencing billions of dollars in clients' profits, brand value, and equity. And Howard, I'm excited to have you here. Welcome.
Thank you. I'm excited to be here.
How are you today?
Very good for a cold winter.
Excellent. And Howard, like I said in the beginning of the show, I'm very excited about you coming on the show because I see and I learn about the value of branding as I've been developing my own law firm. But I think that people in the service business they're not really appreciating why branding is crucial, especially as we leap over to 2015, and we're going to talk about that. But before we dive into our content, why don't you give our listeners just a brief intro about yourself and why you do what you do? Sure.
Yeah, I've been branding and designing companies since 1987 and see the evolution of branding itself before it was even known as branding. A little background, I've worked with a lot of the Fortune 500 companies that you mentioned, like Xerox, ABC, Apple. And what we do specifically with our company that differentiates from others is that we actually design companies so they're more valuable to all stakeholders and shareholders. That means employees, to investors, to anybody who's in contact with the brand. And by doing that, we actually are able to create stronger and better results. So that's in a nutshell is what we do, is we build brands from the inside out, design their culture, and design the way they look and feel.
Excellent. And Howard, what is you have a book called Authentic Branding, and I'm going to link the link to the book at the show notes. But why don't you tell us, before we even talk about branding, what is an authentic brand? And why did you call it this way?
Well, an authentic brand, what I've noticed is that a lot of companies over the years, they start to lose the authenticity of why they're actually in business. And when they move off their core, they tend to start chasing profits rather than really supporting the consumer. And now with the consumer being more savvy and more sophisticated, they get to vote with their dollar. And so the authenticity comes into place to keep brands authentic so they can be felt in the heart and minds of the consumer. So that's the reason why I created authentic brands and actually pointed out which companies companies were going to fail, like MCI to Enron. I actually had predictions of when companies start to stray too much from their core values, that they eventually, unfortunately, tank.
Right. And in your opinion, why do you think that brands matter at all?
Well, every company, whether you have a service or a product or information, your branding, regardless or not, it's a question, are you doing it from hope or are you actually doing it from intention? Mm-hmm. Meaning that as soon as you go out there and you want a customer, you're setting off a signal through your website, through your company name, through the person who answers the phone, through your sales or agents. You're creating the image in their mind of how they should think or feel about your company. And unfortunately, most companies aren't strategic about this, and so they start to look generic and almost like run of the mill, and they don't stand out in the consumer's mind.
Right. And one of the things that I noticed when I was reading your book is you're talking about the authenticity of branding that requires a whole brain thinking. And this is something that it's the first time that I came across that concept. Why don't you kind of explain it more? What do you mean by that?
Well, I find the biggest and strongest companies are when they look at the left side hemisphere of the brain, which deals with logic, structure, strategy, and the right-hand side, which deals with the emotions, the feelings of how they actually connect to the consumer. Most companies, unfortunately, look from the left-hand hemisphere where they don't keep really in account that they're going to be able to reach the target audience through emotions first. And the way that we buy, we always buy through our emotions first, and then we go to the logical side. So the strongest companies are the ones that are whole brain approach. And that's the reason why Apple, for example, has been so powerful over the years, because not only do they have a really strong computer and operating system and hardware, and it's all integrated together, but actually aesthetically it's designed as an entire family of suite of products. And so there's this look and feel, people could feel it, and there's something about it that inspires them and it allows them to purchase Apple and gives them the idea and feeling that there's a quality behind the product.
Right, and it becomes almost as an experience when you buy Apple products. And sometimes we buy them, we don't even need them necessarily, but it's the experience of getting another iPad, another beautiful Mac. It's all in our heads.
Exactly. It becomes more than just a need, because if you think about it, most humans pretty much, at least in the U.S., have their needs satisfied, which is, basically your food and shelter and clothing. At that point, it's all about desire. It's all about aspiration and inspiration of really improving one's lifestyle. And so, yes, you're exactly right, where at that point, it's about experiencing the brand and getting the feeling of the brand, where therefore you become really engaged and ultimately where you become bonded in a sense of a loyal customer to that brand.
Right. Another thing you mentioned in your book is the authentic brands are holistic brands. And this is something that I didn't really, I never thought about it that way. What do you mean by that, holistic?
Well, holistic being whole, meaning that it's coming from a standpoint of the inside out, meaning that the cultures, the values are embedded within the brand that are inside the business as well, inside the brand, but then people from the outside can actually experience and feel that. So let's just say that you go to a Mercedes dealership, you're going to feel a certain feeling when you go there and how you're welcomed. And then you have this expectation of what you would feel when you actually drive the automobile. So your overall experience becomes engaged by their overall culture from the inside. How should you be treated when you first come into their doors, especially if it's a brick and mortar, and what are those values that are carried through all the employees? So there's this consistency from the inside out, and that's what I mean by holism, by being holistic. In that approach is basically where it's integrous from the inside out.
And one of the things that I really like about this example and the whole concept of holistic is that whether you are a BMW or Apple, or a lot of our listeners are professionals, attorneys, doctors, accountants, the holistic approach is what we have to adapt. People come to the law firm, people come to the service, they have to see it as a full unit. This is how we treat our customers from the moment you walk in the door until you get serviced and you finish the case. And so that can be brand as well. The way we are the helpful law firm. We are the kind and useful law firm. That's part of our brand. Do you see that being able to be created as a concept?
Oh, absolutely. Especially in the service industry. Nowadays, we have more services than ever before, so it's a very crowded space. So how you kind of, in a sense, rise above the clutter, which I call the conceptual noise, is that you have to differentiate. And although they say, well, customer service should be a given, It's really not. Customer service is not a given anymore. It used to be in the 50s. So nowadays, the companies that are really floating to this top, and you notice this around exactly like in your industry, attorneys, but also in the financial institute, you're greeted a very particular way. That's all rehearsed. That's all part of the culture. So you feel respected. You feel like you're being treated as an equal. And even how you're disassimilating the information in a layman's term. I was just at a doctor's office, and a lot of times when doctors are talking to you, it's kind of like way over your head because they're using terminology that really is a language that works within the paradox of doctors talking to one another. But when they talk to you as an individual, as a patient, and you could feel that, now you feel like you're being related. And that relationship and that being related is what builds trust. It's the exact same thing when it comes to the financial and the legal industry as well, is that the individual, the consumer needs to feel like they're being heard and that you could speak in their tone, in their language, and what's called, quote unquote, being gotten. In other words, you're understood.
And so, one takeaway that we can share with our listeners is that, when you start thinking about branding, you start thinking about acting consistently from day one in the best way that you can get customers to come back to you and respect you. That's the beginning of branding. It doesn't have to be a fancy logo or colors that we're going to, we'll talk about those things shortly. But people forget that branding starts from the moment they walk into your office. They start looking at your brand. And if the brand is not consistent, then you're going to lose big time.
Exactly. And you bring up something really important, Jacob. The brand identity, it's called the brand identity. It's not just consistent of the image of the brand, how it looks like the shape of the Coca-Cola bottle, or let's say a Ferrari or Lamborghini, what it looks like on the outside, and the inside, of course, the engine. But the point being is that it has to do with all the things that trigger your senses. That means even a sense of smell. And now they're making theaters where they're going to shoot off a sense of smell as you're watching a movie to get involved all your senses. The more senses you get involved, the more you could actually engage here again the consumer, and they could understand what makes you distinct and different. So yes, the visual, the auditorial, using all the taste, scent, these are touch. These are all part of the experience of the brand. That's the reason, by the way, why Apple created their retail store, is because they had an opportunity for the consumer to actually experience the brand, walk around the products, touch it, talk to the customer service. So this was what gave rise to the sales with Apple.
Yeah, I never thought about it this way. That's actually a great example where, until that moment, the products were created and then sold. And now you have a retail place where people can just play with it. They let them just do whatever they want with the product to experience it, and then they can actually buy it because they like the experience.
Exactly. And that's why it's even more critical when it comes to service that you actually script what's going to happen from A to Z, from a prospect to close, to actually retaining the customer. What's going to be your overall way that you're going to be able to experience, they're going to be able to experience your brand, and what is it that you're going to be projecting. So therefore, trust, here again, is established, loyalty, and then they start sharing their experiences to their friends through social media or word of mouth, whatever it may be.
And that's why we started documenting the way our receptionists, our staff members are dealing with clients. So it's always going to be the same. So the experience will always be the same, and then they will want to come back here and refer their friends. It's not going to be a surprise every day because people know that they have to act in the same way, the way that will make the customer happy every time.
Exactly, you're exactly right. Those are what are called engagement points. I know other branding experts call them touch points, but I say you have to engage. Every opportunity to create an experience and differentiate and create consistency of that overall feeling that person should receive is an engagement point. So you're exactly right. The way that person walks up, What does it look like, the reception? Who does that person who's greeting them look like? What are they saying? How is that person dressed? How are they greeting them? So forth and so on.
Great. And what do you mean by perception of a brand? This is an interesting concept, and I would like to talk about it a bit more.
Sure. Yeah, there's the perception of the brand is basically how are you being perceived? Mm-hmm. And the point is most companies are not even clear of how they're being perceived because they're looking at what I call one-way street. They're looking outward, but they're never looking through the eyes of the consumer. So the eyes of the consumer is what creates the overall brand experience and what's called brand image. So if you're perceived a particular way and then your reality is different, there's what I call the gap. And generally speaking, with most companies, there's this gap between how they're being perceived and what is the reality. So let's just say that one company says, "Oh, we give the greatest service than anybody in our industry." That's what they feel is the perception. But then if they do a survey, the reality may be, yes, that company gives great service, but I just don't like how you go to voicemail all the time, or I don't like the tone of the receptionist. And so there's information that they didn't have about the perception, and that's what's important to actually make alterations and corrections. So the perception is really important of how you're being perceived, but getting good data to discover what are those perceptions.
Right, and and this is really important because the way people perceive it is really what is going to stick in their mind.
Exactly. That's what's called brand image. Mm-hmm. You have no control over how people perceived and what's stored as a brand image in their mind. Now, you could influence that perception, but ultimately they own that. So, for example, if I said, would you rather have a brand new Ford Pinto or a brand new Ferrari for free, even though maybe people haven't driven either of them, they all have a perception that a Pinto is lower class than a Ferrari, and most people obviously would choose a Ferrari. Right. The point is that has stuck in the consumer's mind of what that perception image is.
Right, exactly. So it's very important to have that perception set correctly from the start to make sure that people, it's very difficult to change people's perception after it's been formed already.
Exactly, and that's why at the very beginning when you asked who needs branding, or it needs branding and is using branding, and that's the difference between hope and intention. Mm-hmm. When you're doing it from hope, then basically you're basically putting off wrong signals and you're creating an impression or a perception that's a misperception, versus if you do it intentionally, now you're designing through strategy of how you want to be perceived.
Right. One of the things that I hear from marketers predicting trends for 2015 is the power of storytelling. The storytelling in marketing and delivering messages is going to be huge. And I wanted to hear your take on how do we tell an authentic story as part of branding?
Well, where I start with, and that's a really good question, that's one of the reasons what makes a brand so authentic is what I call their back-end story, the storytelling behind the founder, behind how that company got formed through partners. And that is super critical. And that comes from really the company's philosophy and vision, by the way. So when we work with clients, for example, the first day when we're working over them with a course of 3 days, the first day, all my energy and focus is around the CEO, the president, the founder of the company, and understanding their vision, like what legacy do they want to leave behind? And legacy meaning that it has to be beyond money. It has to go through a process of what difference are they making on this planet. Whether if it's a local or national, they're making a difference. And that's what people want to feel. People want to connect and feel that you're not about making money off of me, but what is it that you want to make a difference? So that's that's what distinguishes other companies, is part of that back-end story through storytelling. Another part of the storytelling is your philosophy, and that's the reason why Google attracts so many people that want to be employees, or let's say Zappos, for example, as well, right. And Virgin. So the philosophy is part of the big why you're in business. And the philosophy has to do with more of the culture from the standpoint of the values that you're setting up. Let's say it's collaboration. So if you feel like you really want to contribute, you want to collaborate, and another company has a value of collaboration, well, the more likely that you're going to be able and entertained to join that company.
And the human factor of telling the story of the brand is so important. And I'm looking at, we did a lot of changes in our firm where we, even looking at the bios of the attorneys of the firm. Mm-hmm. Before that, they looked like almost any other bio of any other law firm on the web. And they're always the same, went to law school, did this and this. And starting to put some personal touch into the story. Like, who is this guy behind the picture? What does he do on the weekend? This is something that I feel is kind of resonates with what you just said. People want to know who is behind the brand and what do they do? Are they human? And if they are, maybe that makes them authentic, and maybe we want to do business with them in a way.
Exactly, because that brings it down to a level of I could connect with you. What's happened over the years, it used to be top-bottom, and now it's become more of an even kill as far as how people relate to one another.
Right. And what's some of the tools that you would use when somebody is telling the story? Would you use video or particular images through like infographics? I'm just curious to see if any tools that you can recommend for people to be able to tell their stories effectively.
Absolutely. You bring up a really good point. I believe one of the big reasons why this big trend is occurring is because so much was left up to the imagination of the written word. Basically, back in the old days, all you had a brochure, right?
Right.
Nowadays, you have all these ways of connecting with your customer or prospects, and of course, one of the biggest pieces is social media. And social media allows you, of course, to do videos, through YouTube, through Google, through all the different other applications to get really connected through Facebook. Through Facebook especially, and it's LinkedIn as well. So you have these opportunities to really connect to people on a more personal level. And these more personal levels allow people to step into your world closer. And the closer they could step into your world, the more they could resonate with, the more they could feel that trust. And trust is the ultimate shortcut to connecting or making a buying decision, or actually having an employee become part of your firm, or vice versa.
Because without trust, it's very difficult to end that cycle. I mean, why would they even pay you or retain you if there's no trust? And it's going to take longer for you to actually get to that end result if there is no trust.
Exactly. And now, as human beings, we use our five senses that we're able to kind of, like you could say, sniff things out, mm-hmm. especially when it comes to the social media. Like, is this person genuine? Are they authentic? Do I even want to work with this company? So there's this, you're exactly right. You could weed in as much as who you want to bring into your culture, as much as you could weed out who you don't want to be part of your culture.
Right, exactly. And if somebody is in business right now, they've been doing business for several years, whether service business or anything related, and they are not acting as a brand, what do you think are some of the first steps one should take to start getting to that point where they are consistently acting as a brand and improving on that concept?
Yeah, and some distinction. They're acting as a brand, but they're just not acting as a very powerful brand. Mm-hmm. Or a very, you could say superior
effective
brand. Very effective, superior, legitimate, or authentic. One of the first things is really to get clear of your philosophy. Like, what is it that drives, and what is the overall purpose of that business as a brand? Like, is it really about making a difference in people's lives, and what part of their lives? Like, making it where they, let's just say, like, I'm just making this up, let's just say someone is getting a divorce, mm-hmm. and you're the attorney, you're the firm that says, hey, we care and we want to have each party leave on the highest honor rather than having it where they want to cut each other's throat. So, and then we want to do it in the quickest and swiftest way. So you could come from that angle, which would really differentiate versus the other ones that are just doing it from hope and saying, hey, come in here, we'll make sure that you win regardless. So you're changing the perception of how you want to be perceived in the marketplace. And that has to come here again from your philosophy of why you're choosing to do your business and perform the way that you're going to perform within your business differently than the rest of the market.
Right, and in my mind, especially now with the cluttered market of attorneys, accountants, any professionals, there's so many of them out there. Being an effective brand is what's going to separate you from the rest, and how you can actually charge ahead from the competition.
Exactly, and then so once you figured out, let's say there's basically 5 major things that I think which really accelerates a company's growth when they're repositioning themselves is, one, get clarity on your proposition. What is it that you're selling that differentiates you from others? The second is your philosophy, like I mentioned. The third is your vision. What is the legacy you want to leave behind and differentiate from others? And then the fourth is, what is the personality you want to project to others with your brand? For example, you got let's say with the car insurance, right, you're seeing like the Gecko Lizard for Geico, you see Mayhem for Allstate, you see Flow for Progressive. There's a certain attitude, there's a certain tone to these companies, and it's written that way, and it's verbalized that way, and their videos are shown in a particular way. Everything is focused around that attitude and perception of how they want to be perceived. Okay, that's called brand personality. So it's very important to get clear on that brand personality. The fifth thing would be your brand promise. What is it that you want to promise to your consumer that is different than anybody else? Kind of like how FedEx introduced absolutely guaranteed overnight. So they differentiate from the post office where things would take forever or even get lost. So they figured out, hey, this is how we could differentiate from the others. And look at what happened. They're the number one and the biggest carrier service in the world, and they moved pretty quickly if you think about how long it took them to really be a global company.
Right, because the promise was there and they actually delivered, which was perfect.
Exactly. They're clear on their promise. And that's one of the big problems that I find that even the biggest companies face is they're not really clear on their brand promise. They're not clear on what really makes them different. And then when you're not clear on that, the tension's sitting on the surface, and unfortunately you start to look like another Me Too. The problem with that is that then you're beaten up around pricing, not based on value.
Right. Exactly, and this is something that most people are not understanding. And once they do get it, it becomes more effective for them to take their brand to the next level. Howard, I want to talk to you now about execution, which is kind of my favorite part. Design. How important is design in any brand?
Oh, nowadays it's more important than ever. And one of the reasons here again is because there's so much clutter in the space. Look at all the cars that are on the market now. Look at all the cereals when you walk down an aisle. Right. Look at all the grocery stores. It's like everything's in such an abundance. Now, this is the good thing, that most products, most product designing, most design packages of companies, their logo, their website, over 99% of it is not up to par to reflect the value of what they bring to their customer. Because most companies, here again, are shifted on the left side of the brain, which has to do with logic and structure. And so they think that's important, which it is, but they're actually misjudging and undervaluing aesthetics. Mm-hmm. And aesthetics play an equal role, if not a more important role at times, than the fundamentals of business, because you're going to have to attract your customers. And without being able to attract them, you have no customers to actually produce a profit. So the aesthetics, the execution from your logo, which I call brand mark, to your retail space, to your signage, to the interiors of your building, to your billboards, to your TV spots, right, web pages, social media pages, those are so imperative that, one, that they look high-end professional to really represent the value of your brand, your business. The second thing is consistency. is to make sure everything is tied in together, one specific look. If it's like owning a color like blue, like how Pepsi-Cola owns blue and Coca-Cola owns red, that consistency and that ribbon that Coca-Cola uses, that's shown through everything. That's called trade dress, as you know. So these things are extremely important to remind the consumer who you are and for quick identification as well.
Right. And so whether you are a small business or a large company, that should be the core, because colors and consistency is really what's going to be the driving force here for recognition, because they're always going to see the same pattern, the blue, the yellow, whatever the combination is.
Exactly. And a big, most people don't understand this, which is really important, is that advertising, there's lots of different types of advertising, but traditional advertising is designed as what's called brand awareness. A lot of times if you see something in Wall Street Journal, you don't see any price tag when it comes to certain products, because they're kind of saying, hey, this is who we are, this is what we stand for, this is the way we look and feel. You may not be ready to buy from us right now, but we just want to remind you who we are. And then maybe a month, a couple years happen, a couple more years pass by. You've now been ingrained of what that company stands for and what their look and feel is, that they've built trust on a subconscious level. So now when it comes to maybe purchasing, let's say they're doing advertising, let's say on a stereo system, right. Now that you've actually tried to buy a stereo system, subconsciously they've actually waved a flag in front of your eyes, but in your mind, saying, here I am, this is what I stand for. And then when you go to the store, then you're actually looking for that brand.
And, I was reading about this probably years back, and one of the things that I've done in my firm is, we've chose the colors of light blue. I'm talking about the law firm, the light blue and white. And I keep, we had the logo the same way. We had the pens and letterhead and everything here stayed the same, using those two colors, well, actually three colors, blue, white, and light gray. And I kind of, I tried to stay consistent as much as I could, but I guess that was one of the things that I did right with colors.
Exactly, is to use the same colors and be consistent. And if it nail it down to the specific Pantone color, RGB color, and CMYK for consistency. But yeah, that's very, very important, because if you use a slightly different shade, like so they say it's supposed to be a deep red, and it becomes a bright red, you could look like two different companies.
That's true, exactly. And then you're actually hurting yourself more than helping.
Exactly.
And Howard, if somebody is about changing their concept or starting new, what are some of the strong colors combinations that you can just kind of throw out there as a good combination for attention purposes, for trust, if there is anything like that?
Well, each color represents a different feeling or emotion that brings up. So like red, for example, it says it's more like alarm, it's more like shouting color, it's more alert, warning. That's the reason why, like a signal light, why they have the color red on top, because it's the most important color when you need to stop. So it yells at you, it shouts at you. Where green, yellow is caution, and green is more like passive.
Right.
And so that's the reason why we design the lights that we've designed in the signal lights. But so blue has a feeling where it builds trust very quickly. Blue builds trust. Silver is more forward thinking. So blue and silver makes a really great combination. Orange tends to be a fresh, new, vibrant colors. But even when you change what's called, so the color red, blue, and green are hues. And then you get into values, from grayscale, black being the darkest, white being the lightest. So when you move up the grayscale, you could have a deep red, and that stands for sophistication, like you're going to have this beautiful bottle of red wine. Where if it's a lighter red, it could be, hey, that's geared towards a child's drink, like let's say, high C or whatever it may be. So even the same hue, but using that scale from dark to light, changes the combination of not just the aesthetics, but the emotions tied into that. If it's youthful, if it's adult, if it's amateur, or if it's professional, that's just using one color. So then when you combine another color, it takes on, of course, another meaning.
Exactly. And people should probably play with those things depending on what they're trying to offer, and it should be compatible with their personality as well.
Yeah, there's a couple of things around that though. When we look at colors, when we're working with companies, we take a look at the client's top 5 competitors and look at their colors and how they're using their colors. And another important thing to branding is differentiating. So let's just say everybody's using the color red in that industry. Well, it's probably a good idea to use a different color because that way you stand out, especially if it's something where it's a signage. Okay? So it's really important to understand what the meanings are behind the colors, the psychology, the emotions, and also understanding who's in your space that's using similar colors and are they consistent with it, and then think about perhaps using a different color to stand out.
Excellent advice. And Howard, as we come to the end of our show, why don't you share with our listeners a few tips for success in 2015, whether they want to create a better brand and be successful in getting out there and making a difference?
Well, a big one is because there's so many different medias that we could use now, whether it's offline, meaning TV, radio, print, or online, as we know, is like social media, websites, is to really understand to have it where you have a destination. If you don't have a destination that isn't designed appropriately, you're going to lose a lot of potential. So let's just say that your destination where you want people to arrive to is your website. Well, you better make sure that before you work on all your communication pieces that your website really becomes its 24/7 store, where it really explains the differentiation about your brand versus others, but it also has a call to action as well, which is how can you get a hold of that person or that company or that firm. So it's always really good to have really a lot of clarity around your destination. Now, in your industry, your destination ultimately would be your bricks and mortar, your space that you operate from. So it's be very, very, very useful if you had your space ultimately reflect how you want to be represented, and who do you ultimately, as your ultimate target customer, how would they perceive your space, and have that orchestrated, your office space, your reception, the signage, everything about it, the colors that you're using, all those things will add up valuable points, you could say, to building that trust.
Excellent advice. And I want to conclude with a piece from your book that ends your book, and it says, build a brand so authentic that no competitor can duplicate it. And to me, this is like one of the most powerful statements, because once you build that authentic brand, there's really no competition out there.
Exactly. And what the cool thing about that is, it's so authentic to you that it's so easy. It's so easy to build that brand awareness and build all the alignment engagement points around that. It becomes fun, effortless, and really engaging for the consumer as well.
Exactly. Howard, please share with our listeners verbally where they can find you online, whether you want to share your website, your Twitter handle, and I'm going to, in the show notes, we'll of course have a link to your Amazon link to purchase the book.
Yeah, my website is howcreative.com, H-O-W creative.com. And I'm very friendly, so people can email me directly. My email is howard@howcreative.com. And even my phone number is 310-455-0389. My book, which we spent literally 4 years writing, I had 4 editors help me with it, can be found on Amazon, pretty much every bookstore, but Amazon's the fastest and quickest way to get my book.
Excellent.
And it's Authentic Branding by Howard A. My middle initial is A. Lim, Howard A. Lim.
Perfect. And we'll have the link over there. Excellent. Thank you so much, Howard, for sharing this valuable information with us. I think we got a lot of great tips and actions to implement in 2015. A pleasure to have you here on the show.
Well, thank you so much. Pleasure being here.
And thank you, the listeners, for tuning in every week. This is Jacob at enchantinglawyer.com. If you have any questions or comments, we'd love to hear from you every week. And as we end the year, I encourage you to take action, to re-listen to some of our favorite podcasts, and make 2015 a great year. We'll see you at our next episode.